I think there's two factors at least here. One is some of these would have been announced early on, and businesses didn't really know where the pandemic was going. So, if you think back, I remember I told my class, actually, I was teaching at the beginning of the pandemic, and I remember telling the class, this was in, March 2020. I said, we're not going on Zoom because I'd rather just do it in person when the lockdown ends 2 weeks from now. And, that was like clearly just totally wildly over optimistic. And so I actually never ended up every 2 weeks, thought, well, it will be almost here. So I think some of the Fed RTOs would have been in 2020, 2021, where we didn't know where things were going. So that's kind of fact one. The events changed. I think the other driver of redo of RTOs is just unrealistic expectations from managers, CEOs. Even as an academic, even having worked on work from home for 20 years by now, I was hugely surprised about how effective this has been, how much people like it, how widespread and stable it is. So it's not surprising that many managers, execs, CEOs just thought this was a flash in the pan, announced very aggressive RTO policies, and then discovered, an enormous pushback from employees, quit rates, people getting very unhappy, issues with DEI, and then decided to revise the plan. So, that feels a little bit more like groping away in the dark, like trying to find the light switch. And, you put one hand out, it's not the right, you put the other hand out, etc. So, you see that every 6 months or a year, they announce, re-announce. Some of that is actually associated with change in CEOs or change in chief person officer or chief human resource officer. So one of the interesting things is the Pittsburgh study. And the Pittsburgh study is fantastic. So it looked at the S&P 500 biggest publicly listed companies in the US, and 138 of them had return to office announcements. So it analyzed what was going on. First thing it found is RTOs tend to happen when company performance is poor. So stock returns are down, performance sales growth is slowing down. So first fact is it's kind of, for the CEO, a grab bag of blame, work from home, or desperate, try something different, which is totally understandable. I mean, if I was an exec and the board is, thinking of firing me, I'm getting pretty nervous. I'm definitely going to try some radical stuff. The second finding from the study is it doesn't damage, but it also doesn't improve accounting and stock return performance. So you can kind of think, look, if it doesn't improve performance in the short run, we know it increases quit rates. We know it makes it harder to hire, which generally will show up in the long run. I suspect on average return to office announcements have not been that helpful for performance. There's two extremes. One is tech concept of failure, which is great. You love 2 or 3 failures because you've learned. The other extreme, I guess, would be, learning to land an aeroplane, that you really don't want to be learning from failures because you may not get a second chance, or, open heart surgery or something like that. So this is somewhere in between. I would say it's very natural. So it feels to me like, RTO policies are a bit like New Year's resolutions or maybe diets. Many people are going to experience 1 or 2 failures until you get it right, but you should learn from them. This is an enormous change. I would say to HR leaders, this is a natural process, but at this point, the critical thing is copying other firms. If you're an outlier, I'd kind of be a bit nervous. So, for example, companies where they've pushed for incredibly aggressive return to office policies, it's a bit worrying. It is possible to be an outlier. Look, people are different. Some, when we survey the population, we find about 20% of employees want to be fully in person, about 50% want hybrid, and about 30% want to work from home. So if you're a small company, you may say, look, we're just going to appeal to that 20% that want to be fully in the office. The issue is if you've inherited a lot of employees from pre-pandemic, you should bank on only 20% of them are happy. Going forwards, you can pick who you hire, but for your, grandfathered in employees, that's tricky. The other lesson from having talked to maybe 1,000 to 2,000 managers, firms, seen the survey data is for employees that can work from home, think professionals and managers, it typically does not make sense to have 5 days back in the office. So I think the one easy thing to say is a mistake is if you have employees that can easily work from home 2-3 days a week, having them in particular on Fridays is extremely painful. So why is that? Employees really don't like it. We can put numbers to it. They count the ability to work from home 2-3 days a week the same as about 8% pay increase. So particularly each extra day you're forcing them in is getting more and more painful. And by the time you come to that fifth and final day, typically Friday, you've really upset your employees. And the evidence looks like you're not getting any productivity gain because most people have, a day a week of quiet things they need to do, reading, writing, paperwork, Zooming, other offices, talking to, remote clients. They just do that on the Friday. So I would, the one mistake I think is fully aggressive return to office where you have 5 days. It's less obvious below that what is the optimal number of days in the office. I would not say there's a perfect cookbook here. It really depends on how much face time, in-person time, building culture, mentoring you need. So at one extreme, imagine you have an office full of early 20-somethings in, say, marketing or some creative thing. They're all very social. They want to come in. They want to be mentored. You're probably looking at 4 days a week. At the other extreme, imagine you have an office full of more like 30, 40-somethings that are quite experienced. They've been working together for a team for quite some time. They maybe have kids. They live potentially out in the suburbs. That could easily be a setup where 2 days a week or even one is all you need. One interpretation is every firm has made an announcement, but 43% of employees just aren't aware of it. And that definitely is something I've come across that, the CEO, CHRO mentions it and it just doesn't really get pushed down or it gets forgotten about or lost in emails. The other view is some companies are kind of doing this in a soft version whereby they are, telling managers to figure it out on their own. So there's no formal policy. Informally, each manager and, is basically making sure performance works in their team. My favorite company, look, I've been talking to them for a long time from the get-go, but would be Lazard's, so the investment bank. So Lazard's pretty early on, I think 2022, maybe even 2021, went to hybrid with 3 days in the office, 2 at home. And they've been pretty consistently stuck with that. Now, recently, they've talked about tweaking it a bit across different countries. I mean, they're a big global organization with offices right across Europe, North America, Asia. And they said, some extent in mainland Europe and particularly in Asia, there's a desire to come in a bit more. But they stuck pretty closely to the original plan from the get-go. And the original plan from the get-go was really something like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in the office, Monday, Friday at home. I can't remember the exact days. It was either that or, that's kind of flavor A. That's like vanilla. And chocolate is kind of Monday, Tuesday, Thursday in the office, Wednesday, Friday at home, because that's what Apple announced. And a number of others did that. They stuck with it. And I remember talking to, leadership in Lazard's early on and saying, from first principles, this seems a good way to go. You get 3 days a week in the office. That's a reasonably high amount of face time. They have good human resources, HR, kind of performance evaluation. So the critical thing is they can tell if you're goofing off at home. So one problem is if you're badly managed and you rely on your management on watching what people are doing, are they in the office typing away? Does their screen show Excel, Word, Python, whatever it is? That's very problematic when people are working from home. That's what I would call kind of input management or management by walking around. If instead you're much more objective outcome performance managed. So doing a review of my, manager, you'd say, Nick, I'm going to evaluate you on your teaching, on your, research, university service, raising grants, the kind of achievables. That works very well with work from home because even if I'm working from home 3 days a week, I know that what I'm being assessed on is basically you're still going to see it. So Lazard's had a very good management evaluation, performance evaluation system. So they went early on, which I think has become kind of the default, 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. And they've tweaked it a bit, but it's pretty much the same thing.